8:15 in the morning. The USS Ronald Reagan was cutting through the heavy swells of the northern Arabian Sea at 22 knots. The carrier strike group had been operating under a modified alert status for 12 hours, but the radar screens were suddenly blooming with signatures that should not have existed. Within 30 seconds, the crew would face a choice between total catastrophe and a desperate fight for survival. The air over the flight deck was thick with the smell of JP-5 jet fuel and the humid salt spray of the Indian Ocean. A low haze hung over the horizon, masking the Iranian coastline 40 miles to the northeast, where the threat had originated. The first indication of an inbound strike came from the cruiser USS Shiloh, positioned 5 miles off the carrier's starboard bow. The ANSPY-1 radar systems on the cruiser detected 2 low-flying objects emerging from the coastal clutter of the Iranian mainland. These were C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles, skimming just 10 meters above the surface of the water at nearly the speed of sound. The missiles were traveling at over 900 kilometers per hour, leaving the American defenders with less than 2 minutes to react. On the bridge of the USS Ronald Reagan, the commanding officer ordered an immediate hard turn to port to minimize the ship's profile. Below decks, the general quarters alarm began its rhythmic, electronic shriek, sending over 5,000 sailors racing to their battle stations. On the flight deck, yellow-shirted aircraft handlers scrambled to secure FA-18 fighters that were in the middle of refueling operations. The primary concern was the thousands of gallons of volatile fuel currently being pumped through hoses across the deck. The cruiser USS Shiloh fired 2 evolved Sea Sparrow missiles in a desperate attempt to intercept the incoming threats. The first Iranian missile was vaporized 4 miles out, disappearing in a spectacular orange fireball that sent fragments hissing into the sea. However, the second C-802 missile executed a pre-programmed pop-up maneuver, rising briefly before diving toward the massive hull of the aircraft carrier. The impact was catastrophic. The missile punched through the thin steel plating of the starboard side, just below the hangar deck level, at coordinates 24 degrees north, 60 degrees east. The warhead, containing 165 kilograms of high explosives, detonated inside a compartment used for aviation parts storage. The physical shock of the explosion was felt throughout the entire 97,000-ton vessel. Sailors in the lower decks were thrown against bulkheads as a massive shudder raced from the point of impact to the bow. A fireball, 4 stories high, erupted from the jagged hole in the ship's side. The explosion instantly severed main electrical conduits and ruptured fire mains in the immediate area. Within seconds, thick, toxic black smoke began to pour into the hangar bay, where several EA-18 Golf Growler aircraft were parked. The heat was so intense that the non-skid coating on the deck began to bubble and peel. The secondary effect of the strike was even more dangerous. The blast had compromised a fuel line, and thousands of gallons of pressurized jet fuel were now spraying into the fire. A river of burning liquid began to flow across the hangar deck, moving toward the aircraft elevators. The crew of the Reagan was now facing a nightmare scenario, a major conflagration in the heart of the ship, while still in the engagement zone of enemy coastal batteries. Damage control teams, wearing heavy silver fire proximity suits, were the first to move toward the danger. They carried oxygen bottles and heavy hoses, disappearing into the wall of black smoke. The overhead aqueous film-forming foam system triggered, bathing the hangar deck in a thick layer of white chemical retardant, but the fire fed by the ruptured fuel line continued to roar with a sound like a jet engine. On the bridge, the reports were coming in fast and fragmented. The ship was listing 3 degrees to starboard, as water from the severed fire mains flooded the lower compartments. The Air Wing commander ordered all airborne aircraft to divert to shore-based facilities in Oman, as the flight deck was now too dangerous for landings. The USS Ronald Reagan, the centerpiece of American power in the region, was burning, and the enemy was likely preparing a second volley. The professionalism of the United States Navy was about to be tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable. 8:22 in the morning. Hangar Bay Two of the USS Ronald Reagan was a landscape of orange fire and rolling, toxic gray smoke. The initial blast from the Iranian C-802 missile had torn a 20-foot hole in the starboard hull, allowing the humid air of the Arabian Sea to rush in and feed the growing inferno. Damage Control Central, located deep within the ship's armored citadel, was receiving a flood of status reports from over 50 different internal sensors. The ship's list had stabilized at 3 degrees, but the primary threat was no longer the water. It was the thousands of gallons of burning JP-5 jet fuel. The men and women of Repair Locker 5 were the first to enter the smoke-filled compartment, clad in heavy, aluminized fire proximity suits that reflected the shimmering heat. They moved in synchronized teams of 4. Each team carried a 1 3/4-inch fire hose, discharging a thick mixture of water and aqueous film-forming foam. The chemical foam was designed to float on top of the burning fuel, cutting off the oxygen and smothering the flames that reached temperatures of over 1,000 degrees. Visibility inside the hangar was less than 3 feet. The firefighters relied on Naval firefighting thermal imagers to locate the hottest spots and identify any trapped personnel. The sound was a deafening roar of high-pressure water hitting hot steel, punctuated by the sharp, metallic cracks of internal bulkheads warping under the extreme thermal stress. Every few minutes, a secondary explosion would ripple through the bay as small oxygen tanks or tire assemblies on the parked aircraft cooked off. On the flight deck above, the air boss coordinated a desperate effort to clear the landing area. 2 FA-18 fighters, still loaded with live AIM-9X Sidewinder missiles and 500-pound laser-guided bombs, were parked dangerously close to the primary fire zone. If the heat reached the ordnance, the resulting detonation would likely destroy the entire forward section of the flight deck. Tractor crews worked with frantic precision, hooking up tow bars and dragging the multi-million-dollar jets toward the carrier's stern, away from the rising heat. Below in the hangar, the situation was reaching a critical point. A massive EA-18 Golf Growler electronic warfare aircraft was centered directly in the path of the advancing fuel fire. The aircraft, weighing over 15,000 kilograms, was too heavy to move manually, and the power to the deck-mounted winches had been severed by the missile impact. The damage control assistant ordered the immediate activation of the overhead sprinkler groups in Section 3, which released a literal waterfall of chemical foam from the ceiling. 150 sailors formed a human chain to move crates of ammunition and sensitive electronic equipment out of the path of the flooding foam and water. They worked in the dark, illuminated only by the flickering red of the emergency lighting and the occasional flash of a firefighter's lantern. The air was thick with the acrid stink of burning hydraulic fluid and the chemical bite of the firefighting foam, making every breath a struggle, even with the assistance of self-contained breathing apparatus. By 8:45 in the morning, the primary fire in Hangar Bay 2 was being pushed back toward the hull breach. The lead firefighting team had successfully reached the ruptured fuel line and managed to close the manual override valve, cutting off the source of the flammable liquid. However, the structural damage remained severe. Large sections of the overhead cable runs had melted into slag, and the deck plating was scorched white in areas where the fire had been most intense. The medical teams were already at work in the designated triage areas on the mess deck. 12 sailors had been treated for smoke inhalation, and 4 more had suffered second-degree burns while attempting to rescue shipmates from the initial blast zone. Despite the chaos, the discipline of the crew remained unshakable. Every sailor knew their role, and the thousands of hours of damage control drills conducted during the transit were now paying life-saving dividends. While the fire was being brought under control, the commanding officer on the bridge remained focused on the external threat. The USS Ronald Reagan was currently a wounded giant, its ability to launch and recover aircraft severely compromised. To the northeast, the Iranian coastal batteries were still active, and the radar operators on the escorting destroyers were scanning the horizon for any sign of a follow-up attack. The battle for the ship's survival was only the first phase of a much larger engagement. 8:50 in the morning. The cruiser USS Shiloh and the destroyer USS Halsey moved into a defensive screen 3 miles off the burning carrier's starboard quarter. The sky above the Arabian Sea was a brilliant, pitiless blue, but the horizon was already blurred by the column of oily black smoke rising from the USS Ronald Reagan. For the crews of the escort ships, the time for observation had ended. The Iranian coastal batteries were not finished, and the radar screens in the Combat Information Center were beginning to glow with a second, larger wave of incoming signatures. The cruiser, USS Shiloh, acting as the primary air defense commander for the strike group, detected 6 new high-speed contacts at a range of 45 miles. These were Noor anti-ship missiles, an Iranian variant of the C-802, flying in a staggered formation to overwhelm the American sensors. The commanding officer of the Shiloh immediately authorized the use of the Aegis combat system in its most aggressive automated mode. The ship's 4 massive radar arrays, part of the AN/SPY-1 system, locked onto the targets with surgical precision, calculating intercept solutions in less than 1,000th of a second. The deck of the USS Shiloh shuddered as the first of 12 Standard Missile 6 interceptors roared out of the Mark 41 vertical launch system. Each missile left the cell in a gout of white flame and a thunderous roar that could be felt in the soles of every sailor's boots. The smell of burning solid rocket propellant, sharp and chemical like spent fireworks, swept across the ship's superstructure. Within 5 seconds, the interceptors were at an altitude of 10,000 meters, their nose-mounted seekers searching for the incoming Iranian threats. To the west, the destroyer USS Halsey engaged the 2 northernmost targets. The Halsey utilized its own vertical launch cells to fire 4 evolved Sea Sparrow missiles designed for high-speed intercepts at shorter ranges. The air between the strike group and the Iranian coast became a crisscross of white exhaust trails, as the American missiles maneuvered at over 3 times the speed of sound to meet the incoming fire. The cooperative engagement capability allowed the 2 ships to share radar data in real time, ensuring that no 2 interceptors were wasted on the same target. The first intercept occurred 30 miles out. A Standard Missile 6 slammed into the lead Iranian Noor missile, resulting in a brilliant white flash that momentarily bleached the horizon. Fragments of the destroyed missile rained into the ocean, creating a miles-long trail of white foam on the surface. Within 20 seconds, 4 more of the incoming threats were successfully neutralized by the long-range interceptors of the USS Shiloh. The tactical displays showed the incoming icons blinking and then disappearing as the kill assessments were confirmed by the Aegis computer. However, 1 Iranian missile had executed a series of violent, pre-programmed evasive maneuvers, slipping through the outer layer of the defense. It was now less than 5 miles from the USS Halsey, closing the distance in under 15 seconds. The destroyer's automated close-in weapon system, a 20mm Gatling gun capable of firing 75 rounds per second, swiveled toward the threat. The gun began to fire with a sound like a giant piece of fabric being torn in half, sending a stream of tungsten penetrators into the air. The wall of lead found its mark. The Iranian missile disintegrated just 1,200 meters from the Halsey's hull, the explosion sending a visible pressure wave across the water that rattled the destroyer's bridge windows. The danger from the second missile wave had been neutralized, but the strike group was now at its most vulnerable. The USS Shiloh and USS Halsey had expended a significant portion of their ready-to-fire interceptors, and the Iranian coastal batteries were likely already reloading for a third attempt. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Shiloh, the atmosphere was one of intense, professional focus. The tactical action officer coordinated with the damaged USS Ronald Reagan to determine if the carrier could still contribute to the defense. While the fires on the Reagan were being contained, the carrier's radar systems were intermittent due to the massive electrical surges caused by the initial impact. The burden of protection now rested entirely on the Aegis-equipped escorts. The sailors on the deck of the USS Halsey could see the Iranian shoreline through high-powered binoculars. They knew the enemy was watching, waiting for a gap in the American armor. The air remained hot and heavy, the smell of burnt propellant mixing with the ever-present salt of the sea. The United States Navy had held the line, but the mission was shifting from defense to a coordinated retaliatory strike. The order was being prepared to locate and eliminate the source of the fire before the next wave could be launched. 9 in the morning, Sentry 1. The E-2C Hawkeye. circled at 25,000 feet, its massive rotating rotodome slicing through the thin, cold air of the upper atmosphere. While the carrier burned below, the 5-man crew inside the Hawkeye was focused on a 300-mile radius of the electronic battlefield. The mission was no longer just about survival. It was about finding the ghosts that had fired the missiles before they could vanish back into the rugged coastal mountains. The air inside the cramped fuselage was cool and smelled of ozone and recycled electronics, a sharp departure from the heat and chaos of the flight deck thousands of meters below. The mission commander, seated at the center radar console, adjusted the gain on the AN/APS-145 radar system. He was looking for more than just flying missiles. He was searching for the specific electronic fingerprint of the fire control radars that had guided the Iranian C-802 missiles. The Iranian forces were utilizing a tactic known as shoot and scoot, deploying mobile, transporter erector launchers that could fire their payloads and then move into camouflaged bunkers or deep mountain tunnels within minutes. To catch them, the Hawkeye crew had to be faster than the enemy's retreat. "I have a momentary strobe at bearing 035 degrees, the radar operator announced, his voice calm and professional over the internal headset. The electronic support measure system had just tripped on a high-frequency burst typical of an Iranian coastal search radar. The coordinates were pinpointed at 25 degrees 12 minutes north, 60 degrees 45 minutes east. This location was a series of jagged limestone cliffs overlooking the Gulf of Oman, an area littered with natural caves and man-made fortifications designed to hide heavy equipment. The Hawkeye immediately beamed this tactical data via Link 16 to the rest of the carrier strike group. On the digital screens of the USS Shiloh and the USS Halsey, a new hostile icon appeared, marking the probable location of the Iranian missile battery. However, a single coordinate was not enough for a precision strike. The Hawkeye crew needed to track the movement to ensure that the retaliatory strike would hit the launchers themselves rather than empty decoys or civilian infrastructure. 2 EA-18 Golf Growlers, the electronic warfare variants of the Super Hornet, were vectored toward the coordinates provided by Sentry 1. They stayed low, skimming the whitecaps of the Arabian Sea at 900 kilometers per hour to remain below the Iranian radar horizon. As they approached the coast, the Growlers utilized their ALQ-99 jamming pods to blind any local air defense sensors, creating a corridor of electronic silence that allowed the Hawkeye to peek deeper into the Iranian mainland. The radar operator on the Hawkeye noticed a second signature, this one moving. Contact 2 is mobile, heading north-northwest at 40 kilometers per hour. The Iranian battery was on the move, attempting to reposition among a cluster of coastal structures. The challenge for the American commanders was now one of timing. A Tomahawk cruise missile strike would take several minutes to arrive from the cruisers, during which the target could move into a hardened mountain hangar, complicating the mission objectives. The intelligence gathered by the E-2 Charlie was being supplemented by real-time satellite imagery processed at Pacific Command and relayed back to the strike group. The combined data stream painted a clear picture of a coordinated Iranian coastal defense network consisting of at least 3 separate launch sites and a centralized command bunker buried deep beneath the limestone. The Iranian strategy was clear. They wanted to draw the American bunker fleet closer to the coast, into the range of shorter-range shore-to-ship missiles and swarms of fast-attack craft. Inside the Hawkeye, the crew worked with the quiet efficiency of a team that had practiced this scenario in simulators for hundreds of hours. They monitored the fuel levels of the orbiting fighters and the status of the USS Ronald Reagan's flight deck repairs. The E-2 Charlie was the glue holding the strike group together, providing the situational awareness necessary to transform a defensive posture into a lethal counterattack. The mission commander finalized the target package and sent it directly to the fire control computers of the USS Halsey. The sun was now higher in the sky, turning the Arabian Sea into a sheet of hammered silver that reflected the glare of the morning. The E-2 Charlie Hawkeye continued its lonely orbit, its radar beams sweeping the coastline every 12 seconds with mechanical precision. Below, The first Tomahawk cruise missiles were being programmed with the coordinates provided by Sentry 1. The hunt was over. The execution was about to begin. The Iranian batteries had revealed their position, and the United States Navy was preparing to deliver a response that would be both precise and devastating. 9:15 in the morning. The flight deck of the USS Ronald Reagan was a scene of controlled, high-speed desperation. Despite the jagged hole in the starboard hull and the lingering smell of fire-retardant foam, the forward 2 catapults were declared operational by the ship's Master Chief. The mission was clear. The United States would not wait for a third missile wave. Strike Fighter Squadron 102, known as the Diamondbacks, had 4 FA-18EF Super Hornets fueled and armed with a specific mission of suppression. The air over the deck was a shimmering haze of heat and the smell of burnt rubber and salt spray, punctuated by the rhythmic thud of heavy boots on non-skid plating. The lead Super Hornet, carrying the tail number 100, was positioned on Catapult 1. The pilot, a commander with over 2,000 flight hours, watched the flight deck officer's yellow wand. Under the wings of the aircraft hung a lethal loadout, 2 AGM-88 HARM missiles designed to sniff out and destroy enemy radar, and 4 500-pound laser-guided bombs. The pilot felt the vibration of the 2 General Electric 4x4 engines through his flight suit, a low-frequency growl that signaled the raw power ready to be unleashed. With a sudden, violent lunge, the steam-powered catapult fired. The Super Hornet was accelerated from 0 to 260 kilometers per hour in less than 3 seconds. The pilot's head was slammed back into the seat as the deck dropped away, replaced by the white-capped expanse of the Arabian Sea. Within 60 seconds, all 4 aircraft were airborne, banking hard toward the foreign coastline at coordinates 25 degrees north, 60 degrees 45 minutes east. They flew at an altitude of only 50 meters, staying below the enemy's radar horizon, their silhouettes casting long, flickering shadows over the water. As the squadron crossed the shoreline, the E-2C Hawkeye, orbiting overhead, fed live targeting data directly into their cockpits. The foreign military surface-to-air missile battery, which had been providing cover for the mobile cruise missile launchers, had just activated its search radar. It was a fatal mistake. The lead pilot centered the pulsing diamond on his heads-up display and squeezed the red trigger on the flight stick. The anti-radiation missile shrieked off the underwing station, a massive tongue of white and orange fire punching backward into the slipstream. The chemical smell of the rocket motor was instantly sucked away by the 400-knot wind as the missile accelerated to over Mach 2. Below on the jagged foreign hillside, the radar van of the surface-to-air missile battery was the primary target. The supersonic missile slammed directly into the center of the electronics trailer, its 66-kilogram fragmentation warhead detonating with surgical violence. The trailer did not just explode, it disintegrated, sending thousands of shards of jagged steel and silicon spraying into the nearby launch tubes. The foreign military crews, who had been attempting to arm a second volley of interceptors, were thrown like ragdolls by the massive overpressure wave. 2 men standing near the primary generator were vaporized instantly as the diesel fuel tank erupted in a secondary blast. The massive missile tubes of the surface-to-air launcher buckled and sagged under the heat, one of them cooking off and spiraling uselessly into the sand like a broken firework. A pillar of oily orange fire and white chemical smoke rose 200 feet into the air, marking the sudden end of the battery's operational life. The remaining foreign soldiers scrambled for cover as the roar of the jet fighter aircraft engines washed over the site seconds after the impact. The air around the hilltop was thick with the smell of scorched earth and the metallic tang of vaporized electronics. On the tactical displays back on the aircraft carrier, the hostile radar signature flickered and then went gray. The first layer of the foreign defense had been peeled back. The lead pilot pulled his aircraft into a steep climb, his G-suit inflating, to counter the 6G turn as he prepared to designate the next target for his wingman. The retaliatory strike was moving with the speed and precision of a scalpel. But the mission was far from over. The mobile launchers, the ones that had actually struck the carrier, were still hidden, somewhere in the canyons to the north. The 4 jet fighter aircraft reformed their wedge formation at 5,000 meters. Their silver skins glinting in the harsh morning sun. They had successfully suppressed the enemy's eyes, but now they had to find the hands that had dealt the blow. Below them, the foreign landscape was a maze of brown rock and deep shadows, a perfect place for a mobile battery to hide. The Tactical Strike Squadron were now hunting with the full weight of the military forces behind them, and they would not return to the deck of the aircraft carrier until the threat was eliminated. 9:30 in the morning. The destroyer USS Halsey was positioned 20 miles off the Iranian coast, its Aegis combat system locked onto the final known coordinates of the mobile missile battery. The crew in the Combat Information Center had spent the last 20 minutes cross-referencing satellite telemetry with the real-time data provided by the E-2C Hawkeye. The targets were 2 heavy transporter erector launchers, the very units that had crippled the USS Ronald Reagan, now caught in the open as they raced toward a hardened mountain tunnel. The air around the destroyer was thick with the scent of salt and the heavy metallic smell of hot electronics. The Arabian Sea had turned a deep, bruised purple under the glare of the mid-morning sun, the waves slapping rhythmically against the Halsey's steel hull. The tactical action officer on the Halsey received the final authorization from the strike group commander. The mission was no longer suppression, it was total neutralization. Inside the Mark 41 vertical launch system, 2 Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missiles were initialized, its internal inertial guidance systems aligning with the GPS coordinates of the moving targets. At 25 degrees 14 minutes north, 60 degrees 48 minutes east, the trigger was squeezed in a climate-controlled room deep within the ship. The first Tomahawk cruise missile shrieked off the deck, a massive column of white and orange fire punching backward through the launch cell. The physical shock of the launch vibrated through the entire hull of the destroyer, a low-frequency thud that rattled the teeth of the sailors on the bridge. The missile cleared the ship in a heartbeat, its small turbojet engine spooling up with a high-pitched whine as it transitioned to level flight just 15 meters above the water. A dense cloud of white chemical smoke drifted across the Halsey's deck, momentarily blotting out the sun and leaving the sharp, acrid bite of solid rocket propellant in the air. 5 miles away, the lead FA-18 Super Hornet from the Diamondback Squadron rolled into a steep dive. Its pilot peering through the heads-up display, he could see the dust trails of the Iranian trucks through his infrared targeting pod. The 2 Tomahawk cruise missiles were seconds away, and he was the insurance policy. He toggled his master arm switch to the on position, the green light reflecting off his visor. The first Tomahawk cruise missile reached the target area and executed a terminal dive. The 1,000-pound high-explosive warhead punched straight through the center of the lead transporter vehicle, detonating with a violence that bleached the surrounding landscape white for a fraction of a second. The impact did not just destroy the truck, it obliterated it, turning 10 tons of steel and high-grade missile propellant into 1,000 jagged fragments of shrapnel that cut through the nearby scrub brush like a giant saw. A massive fireball, fueled by the volatile C-802 fuel inside the launcher, erupted 300 feet into the air. The heat blast was so intense it scorched the rock face of the mountain 50 meters away, turning the brown stone to a dull, charred black. The second Iranian launcher vehicle attempted a desperate turn toward the safety of the canyon wall, the driver pushing the heavy diesel engine to its limit. The crew leaped from the moving vehicle in a panic, their boots kicking up clouds of dust as they scrambled for the cover of the rocks. But the second Tomahawk cruise missile was already locked onto the thermal signature of the hot engine. It slammed into the rear of the launcher, the blast wave throwing the fleeing men off their feet and tossing them like paper dolls into the air. The vehicle's heavy turret, housing the remaining missiles, was torn clean off the chassis. It rose 6 meters into the air, spinning slowly, before it fell back and crushed the front cab in a scream of tearing metal. A thick, oily column of black smoke rose from the wreckage, joining the haze that already hung over the Iranian coast. The secondary explosions from the Iranian ammunition continued for several minutes, sending streaks of white fire and jagged metal spiraling into the sky. The silence that followed was absolute. broken only by the distant, receding roar of the American Super Hornets as they pulled back toward the sea. The ground around the impact site was a graveyard of scorched earth, twisted steel, and the chemical stink of vaporized fuel. The lead pilot of the Diamondback circled the site once, his cameras recording the total destruction for the after-action report. Both mobile launchers were gone, replaced by 2 massive craters and a scattering of burning debris. He clicked his radio twice, a signal of mission success that was relayed back to the bridge of the USS Ronald Reagan. The United States Navy had delivered its response with the cold, mechanical precision of a superpower. 9:45 in the morning. Deep within the steel labyrinth of the USS Ronald Reagan, the atmosphere in the primary medical ward was a jarring contrast to the kinetic violence occurring on the surface. The air here was cool and carried the sharp, sterile scent of isopropyl alcohol and industrial-grade antiseptic, though it could not entirely mask the lingering, acrid stench of smoke clinging to the uniforms of the arriving casualties. This was the ship's surgical suite and triage center, a space designed to transform the chaos of a missile strike into the orderly precision of life-saving medicine. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the ventilation system and the steady, artificial beep of heart monitors, punctuated by the occasional sharp command from the senior medical officer. 24 sailors had been transported from the hangar deck and the forward machinery spaces in the 45 minutes since the first impact. The triage process followed a strict, color-coded system that prioritized the most critical injuries. 4 sailors were classified as immediate, having suffered severe trauma from the initial overpressure wave of the Iranian Sea 802 warhead. They lay on stainless steel gurneys, surrounded by teams of corpsmen and Navy doctors, who moved with a speed that only comes from years of high-pressure training. The professionalism of the medical staff was the final line of defense for the crew, a quiet but fierce resistance against the lethality of modern warfare. On the third gurney, a young petty officer second class was being treated for deep shrapnel wounds to his upper torso. The jagged pieces of the ship's own hull, turned into lethal projectiles by the explosion, had been removed by the surgical team in a matter of minutes. The lead surgeon, a commander with 3 combat deployments, worked with steady hands, his face obscured by a surgical mask and clear plastic shield. He did not look at the monitors. He focused on the physical reality of the wound, his movements economical and certain. Outside the operating room, 2 corpsmen were already preparing the next patient, a sailor from the damage control team who had collapsed from extreme heat exhaustion and smoke inhalation while fighting the fuel fires. The resilience of the crew was evident in every corner of the ward. Sailors with minor burns or lacerations sat on the deck in the overflow area, their wounds bandaged, but their eyes fixed on the internal ship's television monitors, searching for news of their shipmates and the status of the battle. There was no panic, only a somber, focused determination. One sailor, his right arm in a temporary splint, was already asking the head nurse when he could return to his station in the engine room. This was the culture of the United States Navy, a collective identity that prioritized the mission and the ship over individual pain. The medical department also coordinated the casualty evacuation, or CASEVAC, for the 2 most critically injured personnel. Because the flight deck of the Reagan was still partially fouled by firefighting equipment and foam, the decision was made to utilize an MH-60 Sierra helicopter from the escorting destroyer USS Halsey. The transition was a masterpiece of vertical logistics. The injured sailors were secured in specialized litters and moved through the narrow passageways of the carrier to the midship elevator, which was still operational. As the elevator rose toward the sunlight of the flight deck, the cool, sterile air of the medical ward was replaced by the roaring heat and salt-heavy wind of the Arabian Sea. The helicopter was already hovering 20 meters above the deck, its rotors kicking up a storm of white foam and sea spray. The hoist operator lowered the rescue cable with mechanical precision, and within 4 minutes, both patients were secured inside the aircraft and climbing toward a higher level of care at the military hospital in Muscat, Oman. The entire evolution had been completed without a single error, a testament to the seamless integration of the carrier strike group's various components. Back inside the Reagan, the damage control assistant provided a status update to the medical team. The fires were 100% contained, and the air scrubbers were finally beginning to clear the smoke from the lower decks. The immediate danger of the ship, sinking or losing power, had passed, but the human cost was now fully realized. 3 sailors had been confirmed killed in action, their bodies recovered from the wreckage of the aviation parts storage compartment. They would be honored later, but for now, the living required every ounce of the crew's energy. The sun continued its slow arc across the sky, beating down on the scarred hull of the aircraft carrier. The ship was still a combat-effective platform, but it was a wounded one. The medical ward remained the heart of the vessel's recovery, a place where the physical and psychological wounds of the morning were being meticulously tended to. As the surgeons began their 4th hour of continuous operation, the sense of duty remained unshakable. The United States Navy had taken a heavy blow, but its personnel remained standing, their discipline and skill acting as a bridge between the trauma of the strike and the eventual return to full operational status. 10:30 in the morning. The USNS Arctic, a fast combat support ship, was already closing the distance to the wounded carrier from the southwest. While the combat engagement had moved toward the Iranian coastline, the survival of the USS Ronald Reagan now depended on a different kind of precision, the dangerous and delicate art of underway replenishment. The 2 massive vessels, displacing a combined total of 140,000 tons, were now steaming side by side at a synchronized speed of 15 knots. The gap between them was a mere 50 meters of churning, white-capped water that threatened to pull the ships together in a catastrophic collision if either helmsman wavered for even a single second. The air between the ships was a chaotic tunnel of wind, thick with the heavy smell of marine diesel and the sharp, ionized scent of the ocean spray, being crushed between the hulls. On the deck of the USNS Arctic, the civilian mariners and Navy sailors worked with the frantic efficiency of an assembly line. They were preparing to transfer over 60 tons of emergency repair equipment, specialized structural steel, and thousands of gallons of firefighting foam to replace the stocks depleted during the morning's battle. The primary objective was to provide the Reagan's engineering department with the industrial capacity to patch the hull breach and restore full electrical power to the forward radar arrays. Shot line away, a sailor shouted over the roar of the wind. A pneumatic line-throwing gun fired a small projectile from the Arctic toward the Reagan's midship fueling station. The thin nylon cord was caught by a waiting team on the carrier and used to pull over the heavy messengering hawsers. Within 10 minutes, 5 massive high-tension wires were stretched between the 2 ships, vibrating with the immense strain of the movement. The sight was a masterpiece of American naval logistics, a physical umbilical cord connecting the wounded warship to the vast industrial reach of the United States. The first heavy load to cross the span was a modular industrial pump system weighing 4,000 pounds. It traveled across the wire in a specialized trolley suspended over the crashing waves. As it reached the Reagan's deck, a team of 20 sailors wrestled the heavy crate into the hangar bay, where it was immediately uncrated, and rushed toward the flooded lower compartments. This was the mechanical heart of the recovery effort. Without these high-capacity pumps, the ship would continue to list, making flight operations nearly impossible, and further stressing the damaged internal bulkheads. Following the pumps came the structural components. Pre-cut sections of high-tensile steel plating and portable welding units were swung across the gap. The Reagan's hull technicians, their faces hidden behind dark welding masks, were already waiting in the scorched remains of the aviation storage bay. They began the process of doubling the damaged area, welding thick steel plates over the jagged missile entry point to restore the ship's watertight integrity. The sound of the arc welders added a high-pitched electric hiss to the cacophony of the sea, the blue-white sparks reflecting off the oily water, still sloshing in the bilges. The logistics operation also extended to the air wing. A fleet of MH-60 Sierra helicopters, the workhorses of the carrier strike group, maintained a continuous vertical replenishment loop. They lifted pallets of critical electronics and spare parts for the damaged EA-18 Gulf Growlers from the deck of the Arctic and deposited them directly onto the Reagan's flight deck. Each helicopter stayed over the deck for less than 45 seconds, the pilots fighting the turbulent air currents created by the carrier's massive superstructure. The precision was absolute. A single dropped pallet or a mistimed hover could result in a flight deck disaster that would eclipse the original missile strike. By 11:15 in the morning, the USNS Arctic had also transferred over 200,000 gallons of DFM marine fuel to the escorting destroyers, the USS Shiloh and USS Halsey. The escorts had burned through an enormous amount of fuel while maneuvering at high speeds to intercept the Iranian missile waves, and needed to top off their tanks to maintain their defensive screen. This was the reality of high-intensity naval combat. The weapons and the courage of the sailors were the tip of the spear, but the fuel and the spare parts were the shaft that gave the spear its weight. The replenishment ended as abruptly as it had begun. With the final pallet of medical supplies secured, the transfer lines were released and winched back to the Arctic. The two ships began to move apart, the carrier banking slightly to port, as it regained its independent maneuvering room. The USS Ronald Reagan was no longer just a victim of an Iranian strike. It was a ship, undergoing a rapid, mid-ocean transformation back into a fully capable combatant. The sun was now directly overhead, bleaching the color from the Arabian Sea, and turning the smoke from the repair work into a hazy, shimmering mist. The list of the ship had been reduced to less than 1 degree, and the primary fire mains were pressurized once again. The emergency logistics phase had been a success, providing the crew with the tools they needed to finish the fight. To the north, the Iranian coast remained a dark, jagged line on the horizon. But the American strike group was now refueled, repaired, and ready to secure the sector. 12:30 in the afternoon, the Arabian Sea, 40 miles southwest of the Iranian port of Jask. The destroyer, USS Halsey, was leading a high-speed sweep of the sector, its radar screens now tracking a swarm of 12 Iranian fast-attack craft emerging from the coastal haze. These small, agile vessels were armed with multiple launch rocket systems and heavy machine guns, moving in a classic Wolfpack formation at speeds of 45 knots. The air was heavy and stagnant, the sun beating down on the steel decks with a relentless, dry heat that made the horizon shimmer and dance. After the morning's missile exchanges, the Iranian strategy had shifted to asymmetric surface warfare, attempting to close the distance and overwhelm the American escorts with sheer numbers. The commanding officer of the USS Halsey ordered the immediate launch of 2 MH-60 Romeo Seahawk helicopters, which had been staged on the flight deck for just such a contingency. Within minutes, the aircraft were airborne, banking low over the water to intercept the lead elements of the Iranian formation. The helicopters were armed with Hellfire missiles and door-mounted M240 machine guns, providing a mobile, lethal layer of defense that the fast attack craft could not easily outrun. The sound of the rotor blades was a steady, rhythmic thumping that echoed off the surface of the sea, a mechanical predator closing in on its prey. At coordinates 25 degrees 10 minutes north, 60 degrees 30 minutes east, the engagement turned kinetic. The Iranian boats ignored the warning shots fired into the water and continued their aggressive intercept course toward the kinetic carrier strike group. The tactical action officer on the Halsey authorized the use of the Mark 38 25mm chain gun systems located on the port and starboard rails. These stabilized, remote-controlled weapons were designed specifically to neutralize high-speed surface threats before they could get within rocket range of the larger ships. The trigger was squeezed on the Halsey's bridge. The 25mm chain gun roared to life, a high-velocity stream of armor-piercing rounds tearing through the air with a sound like a giant mechanical saw. The first burst of fire caught the lead Iranian catamaran squarely in the hull, the heavy rounds punching through the thin fiberglass and aluminum skin as if it were paper. The impact sent a spray of white water and jagged debris flying 5 meters into the air. A second later, the boat's forward ammunition locker, filled with 107mm rockets, was struck by the incendiary tracers and erupted in a spectacular white flash. The explosion was instantaneous and absolute. The Iranian boat was literally blown apart, the hull splitting into 3 distinct pieces that were thrown in opposite directions by the massive overpressure. The fireball that followed was a brilliant, searing orange that momentarily bleached the blue of the sky, leaving a cloud of thick black smoke that smelled of burning gasoline and scorched rubber. The men on the neighboring Iranian vessels were thrown off their feet by the shockwave, their formation instantly dissolving into a chaotic scramble for survival. They had expected a slow-moving target, but they had found a wall of disciplined, high-velocity lead instead. The MH-60 Romeo helicopters followed up with 2 Hellfire missiles, targeting the largest of the remaining fast attack craft. The missiles streaked off the rails, leaving thin trails of gray smoke that vanished in the wind. The first missile struck the engine compartment of a Boghammer-class patrol boat, the warhead detonating with a focused, directional blast that sent the entire stern of the vessel flying into the air. The boat sank in less than 30 seconds, leaving nothing but a spreading slick of rainbow-colored fuel and a few floating orange life vests on the surface of the water. Seeing the total destruction of their lead elements, the remaining Iranian boats turned hard toward the north, fleeing back toward the safety of the coastal shallows where the deep-draft American destroyers could not follow. The USS Halsey did not give chase, its mission of securing the immediate sector already achieved. The tactical displays showed the hostile icons retreating and then disappearing as the boats moved into the radar-opaque terrain of the Iranian coastline. The threat to the USS Ronald Reagan and the commercial shipping lanes had been effectively neutralized for the remainder of the operational period. The sea returned to its deceptive, sun-bleached calm, though the air remained tainted with the sharp, chemical smell of cordite and the lingering smoke from the destroyed vessels. The Halsey slowed its engines to 15 knots, resuming its station in the defensive screen around the carrier. The crew remained at their battle stations, but the tension had eased. They had demonstrated that the United States Navy was equally capable of fighting a high-tech missile duel or a close-quarters surface engagement. The Arabian Sea was once again under American control, and the path for the Reagan's transit toward safer waters was now clear. 18 hours after the initial missile strike, 4 in the afternoon on the 28th of March, 2026, the USS Ronald Reagan, its starboard hull, scarred by fire and patched with fresh steel, was now steaming toward the deeper waters of the Gulf of Oman. The carrier strike group moved with a grim, practiced efficiency, the defensive screen maintained by the cruiser USS Shiloh and the destroyer USS Halsey. The air over the flight deck was finally clear of smoke, carrying only the familiar, sharp scent of jet fuel and the cooling salt breeze of the open sea. This was the moment of assessment, where the raw data of combat was distilled into the cold reality of a campaign report. The strategic objective of the mission had been achieved. Despite the initial surprise of the Iranian coastal battery, the United States Navy had maintained the freedom of navigation in the Arabian Sea and systematically neutralized the immediate threat to commercial shipping. The carrier strike group had successfully demonstrated its ability to absorb a catastrophic hit, manage large-scale damage under fire, and deliver a decisive, proportionate response within a 4-hour window. The Iranian attempt to close the strait had resulted in a significant degradation of their own regional coastal defense capabilities. The cost to the United States was documented with professional honesty. 3 sailors were confirmed killed in action during the initial detonation in the aviation parts storage compartment. 28 personnel had been treated for injuries, ranging from severe shrapnel wounds to second-degree burns and smoke inhalation. 2 EA-18 Golf Growler aircraft were classified as mission killed due to heat damage to their sensitive electronic suites, and a 20-foot section of the Reagan's hull required extensive dry dock repairs at Naval Station Rota. However, the ship remained an operational combat platform, its nuclear reactors and primary flight systems fully intact. The losses inflicted on the Iranian forces were comprehensive. 2 mobile C-802 transporter erector launchers had been obliterated by Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from the USS Halsey. 1 HQ-9 surface-to-air missile battery had been neutralized by the Diamondback Squadron, including the total destruction of its primary fire control radar and command vehicle. In the final surface engagement, 2 Iranian fast attack craft were destroyed, with an estimated 14 enemy personnel killed in action. The remaining units of the Iranian Coastal Defense Force had been forced into a full retreat, their electronic signatures vanishing from the American radar screens. At coordinates 23 degrees north, 59 degrees east, the USS Ronald Reagan began its transition to a lower readiness state. The crew had been at battle stations for nearly 24 hours. In the Hangar Bay, the smell of burnt metal was slowly being replaced by the sound of industrial fans and the metallic clatter of tools. As the air wing began the process of rearming the FA-18 fighters, the discipline of the sailors remained the most critical asset of the strike group. They had faced the reality of high-intensity naval warfare and had not blinked. The regional command, center in Bahrain, issued a final summary of the engagement, designated Operation Iron Curtain. The report emphasized that while the Iranian strike was a serious escalation, the American response had been measured to avoid a total regional war while ensuring the immediate tactical threat was erased. The presence of the carrier strike group continued to serve as the primary deterrent in the region, a massive, mobile airfield capable of projecting power even when wounded. As the sun began to set over the western horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the flight deck, the USS Ronald Reagan appeared as a silhouette of steel and purpose against the darkening water. The flag was flying at half-mast for the 3 fallen sailors, a quiet acknowledgement of the price of sovereignty. The ship moved forward, its wake a long, white line of foam on the surface of the Arabian Sea. The battle was over, the sector was secure, and the United States Navy remained the dominant force on the high seas.